Shalom. Let me get straight into this lesson. But the spirit jumped on me to go back into this lesson. I had did a lesson like this maybe about some months ago. Kind of forget. But this is the visuals, the movies, the images, the documentaries that's saturated in these people's mind when they think about the patriarchs of the Bible. You know, you see all this so-called whitewashing of the Israelites. And I'm going to get into, and you see this right here. This is blasphemy to the highest level. But these Edomites have used these movies as enchantments on the people's minds to indoctrinate them. Look at this: Abraham, Noah, Paul. Was not Paul mistaken for an Egyptian? Would be a dark-skinned man. Was not Moses? This supposed to be Moses. Was not Moses mistaken for an Egyptian? And in this movie, did a lesson about on this some years ago, that they actually use this brownish makeup to make the Israelites look, dark skinned, brown skinned, but yet they still use so-called white actors, Edomite actors, to push that enchantment. And you see it goes on and on, but this that witchcraft, right, of Babylon, Isaiah 47:12, the multitude of thine enchantments, right? Samson, Jeremiah, all this is madness. So let me get into this image too. Salakia. Let's go here. So this image right here is implanted in 98% of the people's minds in the known world. This image right here is they call the J name, but this is actually an idol. This is actually deep witchcraft, and this is what your mother see in her mind, your father, your auntie, your uncle, your girlfriend, take your pick, right? Your best friend. This is what they see in their mind. So let's go and see why this is, why this demon, and why did they do this? What was the method to this? What was the method? Why did they do this? And I just put at the top, I'm using Chat GPT, and it's heavy. It says at the top, it says the image of so-called white Jesus, I'm just going to read it as is considered harmful for several significant reasons: social, historical, Salakia. Somebody, a second. It says psychological and theological, Salakia. Number one, it says historical inaccuracy. I'm just going to read it as is. It says Jesus was a Jewish man. He wasn't Jewish. Yahushua was a Hebrew Israelite from the tribe of Judah. And Joseph, Yahweh was his real father in the flesh. I'm going to read this again. It says Jesus, which his name is Yahushua, was not the letter J pronunciation was not created until 1524. So this is impossible that this was his name. Do your research. Was a Hebrew Israelite, wasn't Jewish. Because when you think about this word Jewish, you think about the people that's in the land of Israel today, which are Edomites, Amalekites, born in the so-called Middle East. Middle East is new speak as well. Asia. It says most likely with brown skin. Do you hear this, for you demons? And it ain't most likely he had brown skin. He was a dark-skinned man. It says dark hair. It says in Semitic features. And let me tell you this too, Jake. This word Semitic is new speak as well. This English language is a big snare. It's Shemitic. Shemitic. And that's S-H-A-M, not no S-H-E-M. I know a lot of you don't really know that. It says the betrayal of Yahushua as a white European, so-called white, and European is newspeak as well. It says distorts history. It does. and erases his true cultural and ethnic identity. It says number two, it says colonial legacy of so-called white supremacy. Check this out. This get good. The image of so-called white Jesus was widely spread during European colonization, Salakia. It was often used to justify the oppression of non-so-called white people. Let's keep going. It says to justify the oppression of so-called non-white peoples, suggesting that so-called whiteness was divine, superior, and morally righteous. This reinforced ideologies of so-called white supremacy. And let me tell you another thing. This word white and black is a big demon among our people. Number three, psychological impact. Listen up to this, Jake. It says when divinity is consistently represented as so-called white, it can diminish the self-worth and spiritual identity of people of color, which would be you Israelites and other tribes. It says contribute to internalized racism, especially in Christian communities of so-called color. It says create a subconscious association between so-called whiteness and goodness, power, or authority. Do you hear this? So this is a psychological impact. This is why people are mentally and spiritually and physically sick. Let me read this again. It says when divinity is consistently represented as so-called white, it can diminish the self-worth and spiritual identity of people of so-called color. And when they say people of color, they calling you colored, which they called you that, right? What's that then? 60s on down, they called you colored. They're just another way they insult your intelligence by calling you people of color. So don't say that. It says contribute to internalized racism, especially in the so-called Christian communities of color. It says create a subconscious, that subconscious is heavy, association between so-called whiteness and goodness, power, or authority. Keep going. It says theological problems. The universal message of Christianity, listen up to this, that they say so-called Jesus came for all people, which is nothing but a lie. He came for the house of Israel, Yahushua. I'm going to read this again. It says the universal message of Christianity is that so-called Jesus came for all people. It's undermined when his image is racialized in a way that excludes or marginalizes others. It says a whitewashed so-called Jesus may alienate people who don't see themselves reflected in this image. But let me see something real quick. Because I want to hear the scripture real quick. But I think that was the main points that I wanted to bring out. That you see the after effects of this disease of so-called white Jesus. It says Job 9:24. It says the earth, which that means the rulership, is given into the hands Salaki, of the wicked. So if I give you my car keys, you have my car keys into your possession. You have control of my car keys. Then your hand, that's just a figure of speech, that someone has, when you have something in hand, you have it firm and grip, right? You have control over it. You have seized it. He covered the faces of the judges thereof. And they ain't you talking about your fat judge at traffic court with the black robe on. They ain't talking about that judge. It's talking about Yahweh Shai, the angels, the biblical patriarchs, the men of the Lord. They whitewashed everything. They covered their faces. It says, if not, where and who is he? So we know that the wicked, pursuant to the book of Malachi, chapter 1, I know Jakes don't like to read or comprehend, besides you brother and you sisters, you know what time it is. Malachi chapter 1, 3 and 4, you can see who the wicked is. It's Esau Edom, the so-called white man. So he covered the faces. Let's go right here. Let's go to this word. Let's isolate one word here so you can really understand this a little bit deeper. All right, we're going to the same scripture. I'm going to he covered. He covered. What does this mean? It says to cover. It says conceal. It says hide. It says hide. That's heavy. So he concealed and hid the true rulers of heavens and earth will be Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai. And he also whitewashed the Israelites. Let's go to this to cover. Let's go right here. Check this out. It says to cover something completely so that it cannot be seen, right? Going back into that Green Bay tree that has covered, blocked the light, right? To the people of the world. It's only for the elect of the nation of Israel to understand. Everybody else going to be in a dumb, stupid, monkey-minded state of mind. They're going to be deaf, dumb, and stupid. It says to cover something completely that it cannot be seen. And he's literally did something called whitewashing. Let's go here. Go to this term, whitewashing. And there's no such thing as so-called white people. It's just a figure of speech. Check this out. It says at the top, you can't make this up. Whitewashing, in a general sense, is the act of covering up, or minimizing the truth. So a lot of times, these Edomite so-called scholars, which they not the real scholars, they'll give you a truth. They'll give you some truth with lies, and Jacob get trapped up in those lies and thinking just because they got a little truth that it's all true. No, they're gonna give you some truth, but they're gonna lace it with lies, right? So we know that they've covered up history. They gave you this imagery right here. That's this in everybody's mind right here. Until you get freed from this, this is what people's gonna see. You know, this image in their mind when they say the J name. That's why we tell you first step of waking up is you have to drop that name, because that's a false name, that's an idol, and that's a demon. You have to come under the true name Yahweh and Yahweh Shai. That's just what it is. And they give you these movies to further do psychological warfare on you. And you know, a lot of our women don't understand that these things have been done mentally to them. They have no clue. They watch these movies, right? The so-called get closer to so-called God in their feeble mind. But what these movies are doing is putting enchantments in their mind, and they'll paint narratives. So they'll, you know, make these movies to implant narratives that's not true, like the whole Adam and Eve story. But Jake see that folly in his mind because that's all he's been shown on TV, right? A goddamn snake and two naked Edomites, right? You know, that's folly. No, that imagery is all a lie. That didn't happen that way, right? Let's go to here. What is this term? Iconoclasm, iconoclasts, right? Iconoclasm, right? It says strong opposition. Let me see. Let me go up. It says right here. Matter of fact, I had found a better definition towards the bottom. It says right here, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, right towards the middle. Iconoclasm literally means image breaking, refers to recurrent historical impulse to break or destroy images for religious or political, you know, so on and so forth. But that's go back into this. They cover the faces because in a lot of these statues, they break their noses off. They did a lot of that in so-called Egypt. With Egypt, if you didn't know this, Egypt is a Greek word. That's not what it was called in our culture. But when the Edomites took over, you know, they start renaming everything. And a lot of these words that you use today are from Greek and Latin origin, right? Hopefully this lesson was edifying. Matter of fact, I wanted to show you one more thing. I don't think I'm gonna have time, but right here, illiterate. So when you go into this word illiterate, this is something that the powers that be would do in the ancient world. They would give you images to give you the narratives of situations that happen, but it'd be all lies. Hopefully this lesson has been edifying. Call Halal Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Racha HaKodash. Shalom.